Hi, I'm Michelle Olivier, and you're listening to Hey, I Want Your Job, the podcast that looks at amazing jobs and what it takes to get them. Welcome to Hey, I Want Your Job. And I'm going to be honest and say this week, Dee, I do not want your job. But I know a lot of other people who do. And I am so thankful for you for doing your job and all the people that you help do the same job and do it even better. So with that somewhat dubious intro, Dee, what is your job title?
So thanks for having me. I am a certified registered nurse anesthetist. It is a mouthful.
And that's just a hard thing to do, to be with people when they're vulnerable, and especially during COVID. Again, hats off and all the thank yous on behalf of everybody for all of the things you guys have done. So tell me, what does a certified nurse anesthetist, what does that do?
So what we do is we are with you through surgery. We put you off to sleep. We put in the breathing tube. We stay with you every breath, every heartbeat through the end of your surgery, and we wake you up at the end. We're with you when you're asleep and no one else is watching over. That's what we do.
There you go. So you give people the happy drugs, is what I heard.
I do. We meet you. We make sure we go over your health history and everything. We can get you consented, and then we start the medication party.
I really feel like you could bring that forward on some of the surgery. I just had to have emergency gallbladder surgery right before Christmas. Oh, you know that's a very routine surgery. It just,
It is, but it's just right before the holidays.
I know that part sucked a little bit, but it was like there was a lot of, we're going to be in here in a minute with some drugs, but just chill. I'm like, I really feel like maybe there's something you could give me now that would encourage chilling out.
I know.
I am not a druggy person. So.
We're like the last people you meet, but the people with the most important medication to whisk you away.
I'm like, I feel like a little nitrous right now would have really just taken the edge off. If there's a suggestion box anywhere for, nurse anesthetist, just know that's mine for the box.
Noted.
So in addition to the work that you do in the medical, directly helping patients within the medical community, you also wear other hats and do other important things. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So a big passion of mine is helping my fellow nurses. And I recently came out with an exhaustion ending course. So my goal is to really help other nurses that are overextended and overwhelmed and exhausted to kind of take back control of their life and their health. And funny enough, I started before the pandemic and I finally was able to work through it. But I feel like even more people need it now.
Does this mean that you are not in any way exhausted, that you have so much free time that you're able to both work your full-time job and help other people who are exhausted? I'm not a nurse, but I am a mom of 2 small children. So please talk to me about this voodoo magic that you have worked so that you have this extra time.
So it was actually born out of my own experience with exhaustion. And I had a very public and very embarrassing, if you ask me, sort of exhaustion episode when I was a new nurse. I'd only been out for maybe 3 or 4 years. And I was just running myself into the ground and overscheduled. And I never said no. And, just basically not taking care of myself and neglecting myself. And in a very public way, I passed out at work. So if you ever wanted a wake up call, all of your coworkers staring down at you, and then basically, as I joke now, dragging you to the ER for a battery of tests, that's a wake up call. So during that time, I had to take some time off. I was actually politely asked to take time off to get it together.
As an HR person, yes, you were.
Politely encouraged. So I
with forms.
Oh yes, lots of forms. So I spent that time just figuring out how to take better care of myself and not find myself in the same place. And then, when I went back to nursing and went back to taking care of patients and then moving up in my career and going back to school, I felt I would run into more and more nurses that were in the same situation I was in and just on that edge of overwhelm and exhaustion, about to have their sort of lying on the floor moment. So I felt the need to just reach out and share everything I had learned when I had all this forced time off that now we don't have. No one at home, no one in healthcare has time off. So I can implement these strategies, and it's really what I want to help others with.
So I want to start with, we always ask people, because people always want to know, how do you answer when people ask what you make? But I think that that's particularly important with you. And I don't expect you to give me a number. Don't worry, Dee. But something, how would you respond to that? Because I think that there's a lot of weird and misinformation out there about what nurses make. And you hear both extreme ends in the media. So you hear, oh, your nurses make like $10 an hour. They can barely feed their families. And then on the other hand, you hear, oh my God, the nurses in New York at the beginning of the pandemic were each getting $1 million signing bonus for being there and put up in pit houses. So there's crazy town information about what nurses make everywhere. So let's start by the conversation talking about that. Like, what is financial reality for a nurse?
Well, so from the nursing perspective, like, so I'm an advanced practitioner nurse. So I have my master's degree. So I do make a little bit above what normal nurses make. I make a tier above, but I always say I make enough to pay off my student loans that got me to this position, and then to live a little.
Okay.
So I definitely feel like there's always room for a bump for anyone on any level.
So. Maybe not the CEOs. Maybe they're doing okay.
Yeah. Anyone that's actually the backbone of the hospital, that's doing the actual work, wearing the scrubs, they have the blood on their gloves, like those people need a raise.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Two of my husband and I, best friends, are a couple that are nurses, which I can't even imagine the logistics that go into just that. But then on top of that, they have triplets.
Oh,
and
goodness.
I know, I'm like, you are the craziest people in the whole wide world. God love you. But your life is too, like, they see each other in passing, like they try to line up overnights, and oh my heavens and stars. I just can't. No. So if only on behalf of Hannah and Graham, yes, you all need more money for sure. But I also think that it's really interesting that right now there's this kind of burgeoning dialogue about lack of compassion in care in the US, and that it's at crisis level, that we have people who don't seek care for things because the impression is that doctors are jerks and they don't care. And that consistently in that dialogue, nurses get singled out as like the last bastion of compassion in the American medical system. Consistently, like, that's what people say and hear, and like, oh man, like the doctor didn't care, but thank God for the nurses. They really helped me through that crisis, etc. And, from my own personal experience, there's good nurses and bad nurses, but by and large, I would concur that the doctors more aloof, the nurses are much more compassionate. Talk to me a little about what that burden, like, first of all, do you agree with that? But second of all, what does that burden wind up feeling like to the nurses, that you get left holding the emotional bag for patients and their families?
So I think I definitely agree with the sentiment that I think that nurses are sort of the last level of compassion, or the last people that do have compassion. And I think that it's not that the other types of providers don't have it. I think it's almost been like worn out of them or beaten out of them. And there's all these metrics they have to hit, and numbers, and it sort of pushes out the humanity piece, which is really what we need. And I feel like, as far as nurses, it's a special calling to go into the field, and you want to take care of others, and you want to be nurturing, and you want to, hold space for them, for their emotions and what they're going through. But I think that with what's going on now, everyone sort of has this like cup, and it's like getting full of everyone else's emotions and all of the things that they're dealing with. And usually you have a day off or time off to decompress, and then you can sort of refill your empathy and compassion cup again. But because healthcare is just being so overwhelmed right now, and there's not enough staff, and there's not enough, support to go around, and the patients are sicker, your ability to be compassionate is, it's dwindling, and our reserves, if you will, aren't there. So we're still as compassionate as you can be, but with what we're seeing now, there's a lot of trauma being seen and a lot of hurt and upset, and you can't heal it while it's still going on. So while we usually use, our days off or weekends off to sort of heal what we've seen and sort of bring our soul back into that caring space, it's just the insults just keep coming and coming and coming, and there's no time to reset. So I feel like it's probably wearing on those providers too.
So let's talk a little about those insults, because I think that this is another, what you hear from the populace is a frustration that healthcare costs keep going up and up and up. So our the perception of the everyman is, I'm paying a fortune for this service. That must mean that all of these people drive home in solid gold Mercedes. And obviously that's not true. But talk to me about where is that disconnect between the fact that we're paying more for healthcare than ever before, and yet our nurses are being asked to do more with less than ever before?
I think there's special interest parties, there's third-party insurance companies. It's not unusual to see like the price of an item for what it actually costs. Then you see the price the insurance is billing, which is usually like a, not to be super specific, but like a 3 to 5 time markup.
Sure. It's like the $50 aspirin example that you always see places. Yeah, sure.
So, and the argument is that they mark up the price to the insurance companies because then the insurance companies only pay a portion of that. Mm-hmm. So I think it's this like moving number. It's like a shell game of numbers, and like, oh, we're going to say it's this, and we're going to overinflate this because we're only going to get half of it. But I feel like there's not enough transparency about what the costs are and what those costs are actually going to, because the people actually touching you and providing the care aren't the ones necessarily receiving any, or even like more than a small percentage of what you're being billed.
Sure. And because your patients get the happy drugs and go to sleep, probably you get less of a brunt than some of your brothers and sisters in arms as nurses who are dealing with patients in different environments. Yes. But you obviously work in a hospital, those people, you see the things. What does that wind up translating to for them? I mean, you hear tales about nurses being abused by patients. Is that real? Is that every day? Is that overblown for media hype?
So and I'll preface this with, before I went back to grad school, I was a bedside nurse for many years. So I had that. I was in the ICU,
all the things.
Yeah. So I know my experiences from then and what I see now. And there's almost this sense of entitlement from the patients because they are paying so much that we are now, like concierge. We are there to get everything they want when they want, and don't wake them up for vital signs, and don't you dare bring them the food from the cafeteria. They want something special and specific, and we're trying to do our jobs and trying to take great care, but the expectations and the reality are so misaligned that I feel like we'll have patients that are combative, or just they're confused and they don't know where they are, and they want to want to fight, if you will, or even patients waking up from anesthesia that are disoriented that want to fight. And that's
drug induced. It's not on them. Yeah. Sure.
You do have the patients that come in that are in the ER that want specific medication, a specific type of treatment, and they're very insistent of what they want. And if they don't get their way, then it can be a violent situation. And I think a frustrating thing for healthcare in general is if a patient punches you or assaults you, there's not really much that you can do. But if you act in any way that's even a bit negative towards the patient, there's so much recourse.
Oh my God, you just blew my mind completely. I guess, oh my God, when you said when they punch you or assault you, I literally, when I asked the question, my vision was you were going to tell me that they call you bad names and shout profanity. It just didn't, it didn't occur to me that it really is physical assault from people not getting what they want. Oh,
and it's wow. It's not all the time. It's not often.
But
there's security to help with that. But there's a large physical aspect to the job, there's not much in place for nurses. I mean, some facilities encourage you to call the police, but if you have, it's just not. The system is not set up to protect you and to protect your own health and well-being. But yeah, patients can get very aggressive about what they want and the type of treatment. And we've even had patients decide they have waited long enough for their surgery. They don't want to wait anymore and they're going to leave. And, maybe the surgeon was in a really complicated case beforehand or something ran over, but they decided they've had enough, they're done waiting, and they leave. So
I think I'm starting to understand. Nurses are always really nice to me. And I'm thinking that maybe it's because I'm like the not jerk. Like when I told you I just had my gallbladder out right before Christmas, I had like 5 nurses just hanging out in my room. We were just, shooting the
that's
shit.
awesome.
Like, they tried to stick me for my IV. We got up to 6 sticks and they couldn't
Oh
hit the vein.
no.
But like
Oh
we were
no.
laughing about it. It wasn't like they were trying to hurt me. But I guess hearing this, I can imagine that probably somebody who still had a sense of humor about it at that point was more novel than I gave myself credit for.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
appreciated. Your patience and understanding is always appreciated.
So, I mean, your description, like I already knew you couldn't pay me enough to be a nurse because I have neither the patience nor the inclination. When my own children need first aid, even I'm like, oh, do you really have to whine? I mean, it's only a head wound. You're
I
fine.
know.
Like
You
I'm
could. That
not.
sounds like you could be a nurse.
Oh no, I would be a terrible nurse. I have zero, like, I just don't care. And I say that really quickly. I also do that in HR for what that's worth. Like, why is this my problem again? But what, like, I have like this almost like apocalyptic, I vision now of hospitals. Like everything feels like it's, warside triage, from, people with patients losing their cool and shouting or attacking or what have you. What solace do you give the nurses that you work with? Like talk me through just like I don't want you to, give away your product, but very basically, what does that look like? How do you help in that?
So I think in the short term, having your really good team and a good team of people that you work with that is supportive, that can get you through anything. But I work with people on more like an individual personalized thing. We can't wait for the institution to make changes. So, we start with the different types of exhaustion and the different types of exhaustion you might be feeling and how that would show up in your day. And, is it you crying in your car on the way home? Or is it, you getting angry and yelling at a coworker about something just because you're so stressed and pulled in 100 directions? And we kind of review that, and we go into the nutrition aspect of things and figure out how we can get you a little bit more energy with the things that you're eating, or we can sort of just optimize what you're already doing to help you a little bit more. And something is, a lot of people don't really have, like I call them stress containers, but like a stress container for when they're at work and when they're leaving the day and they want to leave things behind at work so they don't bring it home with them or bring it home to their children or their families, and sort of having like a little bit of a ritual to create to sort of mentally shift gears into that, okay, I'm going home, or I'm going, to meet a friend out, and just not to carry that baggage with you. And then we talk about some ways that at home you can decompress and sort of prepare for the next day and make sure you're mentally resetting as much as possible and working through things. So you are showing up for both yourself and your patients.
And I so feel that, not having worked in medical, but just in general, I know that when my husband and I lived in the UK, right before we immigrated, I worked for like 5 years. I worked for a company that I had an hour and a half each way commute. And that sounds awful. I know it does.
It's long.
It is. It was a very long day. But all of that was on public transport. So I sat on a train and then I got off the train and I walked like a few blocks. And just about the time my legs and muscles were getting warmed up, I sat on a bus. And then I got off the bus and I walked like half a block, and presto changeo, I was at work. So it really, like, it was built into my professional life and my personal life that I had this switch on, switch off period built into every single day. And I literally read a book a day.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I read very quickly. So, and I read real garbage books. Like, these were not like high literature by any means. There was a lot of vampires involved. And, but so I read a book a day, but by the time I got home, I was just home, and work was past, and I was over all of the things that I was mad and stressed and everything, because I had an hour and a half with some literary vampires to decompress.
Yeah.
And then when we immigrated and I had a 10-minute commute, my husband and I found that I would come home and I was so, and there was really like this whole relearning exactly some of the things that you're talking about there about, having to figure out like a new system so that I wasn't biting his head off, so that I was leaving work at work without having that, that forcibly built in period there. So I can really identify, with what you're talking about. Which makes me think, the kind of stuff you're talking about, I feel like is applicable not just to the nursing world. Are you, if people listen to this and like, oh my God, I need help with that. Are you amenable to non-nurses also using, or is this an exclusive club or?
No, everyone is welcome. Anyone that feels this is calling out to them that they need this. The language is geared towards healthcare and nursing, and there's some examples and some language that are it's like heavily leaning healthcare wise. But anybody that that needs help with feeling exhausted and overwhelmed, especially in today's society, could absolutely come on.
Well, and I think, there's been a bunch of work on it at the moment because, I'm an HR nerd, so I'm tuned into that world. And there's been loads of articles about employee burnout, and companies are trying to figure out how do you fix that? How do you fix that in a way where you can't see them, you can't touch them, like we're all working from home, and that's part of the problem because there's no good boundaries at home, right? So the computer is always there, there's always something more you could be doing. And so the temptation to just never switch off fully is there, and we've all been in this situation now for 9 months and counting. So I think I think that burnout is just increasingly an issue. I know Sherm is already calling it a crisis, but it feels like everything gets called a crisis right now. Like crisis is the buzzword of 2020 and 2021.
I agree.
It's either unprecedented or a crisis. Like those are our only two options at this point. But I mean, what would you classify burnout as a crisis right now?
I think so. I think so in healthcare, specifically speaking, even before the pandemic. So there's like a famous study in 2019. It showed that 49% of all nurses had considered leaving the profession in the next 2 years. So this is nearly half, and it's before we've had this crisis, like to use the buzzword, the crisis. So I feel like it's something that's been brewing for a long time, and this is more than just like a tipping event that just it's sort of going to cause mass problems, and they're going to linger for a bit longer. Like we're still in the middle of it, and like I said before, you can't heal while you're in the middle of something.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a lot of fallout afterwards. And it's funny with the word burnout, and I feel like healthcare has tried to push that word onto nursing, and nurses do feel burned out, but they sometimes don't use that word because it's an institutional word that's been placed on a nurse. And the old thoughts were, oh, you couldn't handle your job, this is why you're burned out. When reality is, no, we really are understaffed or overworked, those
I think that's such a good point, because I do think that there is some context of burnout that puts the blame, for want of a better term, on the individual experiencing it. Yeah. That it's like, you burned your candle at both ends. You overcommitted. You did all of these things. We obviously, all we did was give you options. And we can't adult for you, my friend. So it is but I think there is a very, and I honestly hadn't thought of that before, but I think it is a very kind of blamey term, burnout.
Absolutely.
So what should we call it if we're not going to blame the victims here and call it burnout? What should we call it instead?
I don't know if there's a better name. I call it exhaustion and overwhelm because I feel like that's better received. Those are the words that I use. Burnout does describe it really well. I just think that the stigma of the blaming needs to be removed from the word to have it be as impactful as it could be when describing someone's situation.
I just feel like exhaustion makes people think, we'll go take a nap. Like
Right.
as a mother of small children who has struggled with exhaustion, and I will say, like, I did not just struggle with exhaustion, like I was diagnosed with extreme sleep deprivation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
goodness.
For because of my horrible children, who are also adorable and I love them, I swear. And but literally talking even to friends about the situation, their response was, "So go take a nap."
Oh,
And I'm
no.
like I feel like you really don't understand. If your solution is to that level of exhaustion, or once you get into a medical situation from that level of fatigue, that is to go take a nap, you really don't understand. But I think
Right.
that that's also kind of fair, like culturally. Why would we? Do you know what I mean? So we need a punchier word, D. I feel
I
like this is your
know.
new job, is you're gonna go and rebrand Burnout, find
I'm
some
gonna
new, like,
try.
I'm like racking my brain to try to come up with something really kicky. And I got nothing for you right now, but I will continue to ponder. And I feel like the rebranding it is step one in fixing the problem a little bit.
Yeah, to give the power back to those affected. You have to give them a
Yes.
power word so they can take control.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have to stop like victim blaming here, because I do think that the people going through that, they are victims of an abusive system.
Yeah, I agree.
And as a HR consultant now, I get to say things like that to people. So like I get paid to go into organizations and be like, "Well, yeah, nobody wants to work here because you're really abusive."
Oh,
And they're like, "But we threw them a Christmas party." And I'm like, "I feel like
oh
you don't
yeah.
understand." Like, yeah, well, abusive husbands also sometimes, like they knocked you around on Friday, but look, I bought you a pretty necklace. Like that's who you are right now. Oh, I canceled all of your vacation that I had signed off 3 months ago because I had a staff shortage. And now you didn't get the time off that A, you were planning, or B, paid for a vacation.
Right.
Surprise. And I get to do that because of some secret clause I put in your contract when you signed up a million years ago. But look, I gave you pizza at Christmas.
This is, it's so
That is
true.
an
That's exactly
abusive.
how it happened. Oh,
That is an abusive relationship. And it breaks my heart that the people that we are trusting and needing to care for and literally heal our country during any time, but especially right now, that most of them, in my experience, are in abusive relationships with their employer. And maybe that's it. Maybe you start calling it breaking the abuse cycle
I like
instead
that. That's
of.
very, and that analogy too is so spot on. I feel like it
There
gets
you
the
go.
point across.
There you go. Um, and so you said, loads of nurses think about leaving. And that's where I engage with the nurses the most, is I have a lot of people who come to me as clients who are like, "I'm done. Get me out of here." And they're like, "But I've been a nurse for 15 years. I have no idea what working anywhere but nursing looks like, where anybody would be interested in my skills, what any of that looks like." I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. What successful escapes have you seen people make? Where would you, if you were getting asked that from somebody who needed to get out at this point, where do you see them going?
So there's, if you wanted to stay in the hospital system, you can hop to different departments. There's a lot of different departments where it's less patient care. If it was really a hard stop, you had to get all the way out. A lot of people do some case management work, or they'll do some liaison work with like insurance companies, making sure that patients are getting the follow-up treatments that they need, or getting, appropriate care. So the insurance company wants to pay appropriately. And there's also something new. I think it's called like a journey, or they're like a counselor of some sort. So there's ones for patients that are having different types of surgeries. There's ones for different diagnoses, and they,
Mhm.
like for the example of like a breast cancer, they're like a navigator, I believe is the word, and they take the patient from diagnosis through treatment, through radiation or chemo or surgery or whatever, all the way through the end to their follow-up care. And they stay with that person as their navigator to make sure they don't miss an appointment, they don't fall through the cracks. And that's something that's, it's still considered patient care, but it's not bedside, and you're still using your nursing and your compassion, but you're with one person or with one group of people guiding them through. So I think a lot of people have found that that's, mentally a nice break and a nice reset. And then a lot of people say you can do things like school nursing, but I feel like that's a different type of stress that would accompany that. So,
right.
But,
yeah, absolutely. And so I think it's really interesting that your solutions were mostly and it makes sense that they're still in a hospital environment, because I know that when I talk to a lot of these people, because I view it as an abusive relationship with your employer. With an abusive relationship with an individual, you would say you need to break the engagement. Like you can't be friends with your abuser. And so that's usually part of my advice to them is that trying to be a navigator in your same hospital instead of being a nurse is just trying to be friends with your abuser. And you have to really break that engagement with them and go do something totally different while you heal from that, and then you can come back. So I guess my question is, like, you're there, you're living it, and you're helping people fix this all the time. Am I giving terrible advice?
no, oh, definitely
Or what
not.
is your thought?
Definitely not. I mean,
I can be wrong, Dee. It's okay. It's happened before.
Well, there's definitely a point where you meet people, and I've met nurses that I've worked with that are sort of like, I call it like in the middle, like in the mucky middle, where they're not sure, do they need to leave the profession entirely? Do they just need some better coping skills, and do they need some assistance kind of getting things under control so they can take back their power? Or, just sort of depending on where they are in their journey. And a lot of people will find that, the navigator job or working for an insurance company, you can do that for a third party company from home. And that some people feel that that's enough. They're not totally leaving the profession, and it's enough to separate them away from that abusive employer. And then you'll meet occasionally people that are just like, I just want out. I don't care. And, they'll find they're doing things such as like helping design hospitals or workflow improvements, or it's more of a clipboard carrying job, but they're not actually in the hospital anymore, and they do have that chance to break away. So both advice I think can work, both staying in the hospital and doing something different, or doing an at-home nursing job, or a work from home job, or something completely outside. So I don't feel like you're giving bad advice. I think it just depends on where that individual's journey actually is.
Absolutely. So let's then revert back to the other end of the journey, the young, excited to enter the profession, going to change the world as a nurse types. What would you want them to know going in?
There's a lot to learn, and you're going to feel overwhelmed. You're going to feel overwhelmed. But the most important thing is to just try to find at least one thing in your day that you felt that you did really well, that you can hold on to. And make sure that you're taking time for yourself from the beginning, even if it's 15 minutes to decompress or de-stress and focus on just something that you want and you're finding joy in. Because if you let it, if nursing will take everything you have and give you nothing, and it will beat you down. So if you start out with these tips and tricks to sort of keep your energy and keep your passion, then it won't beat you down and wear you down. So if you start out knowing what to look for, knowing what the pitfalls would be, I think you'll set yourself up for success for a long career.
One of the things that I find fascinating about how we treat nurses is that almost every other profession I could think of that deals with people in a traumatic situation. So social workers or therapists, all of, combat veterans, like all of those people receive some kind of counseling, some kind of ongoing mental health engagement, check-in points, that sort of thing. And then our nursing community, they're just expected to suck it up, buttercup, and deal with it.
Yeah.
I mean, how did we get there? That seems insane to me, that nobody has stood up and said, hey, maybe we have mental health for nurses. Maybe that would be a good start.
I think so. I think you're correct. I do think the tide is changing. I know, initially it's always, again, back to the blaming the victim mentality of, they'll offer the resources, they'll offer therapy and counseling as
Employee
part of your
assistance
insurance.
programs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Or it'll be covered in your benefits, but people are so afraid to use it because of the stigma.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as the culture is changing and as there are more people entering healthcare, I think it's becoming more accepting to say, oh, I'm seeing a therapist, or, oh, I go to counseling, or, oh, I'm utilizing these mental health resources. But, even just 5 years ago, it would be, oh, this person, they needed to take a leave of absence for, exhaustion, or this person, they needed to, leave early to go see their counselor. And there was a lot of shaming, like, oh, you just can't do the work. So I feel like once we start to change how we're viewing it, then not only will access open up, but people that are willing to do it will be willing to take the company or the hospital up on their services, that those people will increase.
I think it seems to me that you and I should start a lobbying campaign for the folks that that do the nursing accreditation, because that's where a lot of that pressure comes from for the others. Like, that's part of their continuing professional development, is that they have to also have some of those touchstones, and they have to be checking in, etc. Maybe that's the answer, is that we say, nope, you have to do this as part of being a nurse, is that every X often you have to go for at least X number of hours and have somebody to talk to. And it's not because we think that you've been made crazy by this job, but it's because we don't want you to be made crazy. Like, because mental health is important, and we could give options about what that mental health check-in looked like. So it doesn't have to be traditional talk therapy. It could be all kinds of other things, yoga retreats. Absolutely. God, doesn't that sound good? A yoga retreat?
Sounds fantastic.
But you could do all kinds of things. I feel like that's the path forward, Dee. Let's get right on that. So. Letter writing campaign.
I love that. I really do. And I obviously think, if the employers are behind it and they're supporting the staff to have that time and not penalize them to be able to go and use those resources, that will be game changing.
Well, and if it's tied to their certification, they won't have a choice, because they need to have accredited nurses. You take it away from the employers. You don't give them the opportunity to be an abusive jerk. You make it handled by someone else. I feel like, yes, we need to get a letter writing campaign going for sure. I think that's the solution to all of the woes. I have a feeling that even if we achieved that, you would not be put out of business for exhaustion and nursing. I think that you would still have plenty of business.
Well, okay, I'd be okay if business took a little hit if overall profession got improvement.
Because you are a nurse and you are obviously very compassionate. Like, that's a great attitude. I don't know that I feel that way. Like, I really hope that nobody learns, like, that as a population, people don't figure out how to write resumes, because I really want them to keep sending them to me. If nobody else ever figures out how to do interviews, I'm kind of okay with that a little bit, just selfishly, So I want to get a little bit controversial for just a second. And I really just want to hear your opinion. So I am not asking you to be an expert on policy here, but as a frontline supplier, there's a lot of argument right now about single payer system. And a lot of folks have said that all of these problems will go magically away if we just take the money out of it, that all of those patients who are feeling entitled and frustrated because they paid, so much money for your services, all of that will go away with the single payer service. Now, full disclosure, I have lived, worked, and gone through cancer in the UK over a 10-year period previously. So I have very strong opinions on single payer systems, but I want to hear what you think and what are your thoughts? Are you secretly like, yes, or secretly?
I feel like from the pro side of it, it will open access to people that maybe didn't have access before or weren't able to get the services that they needed. I think getting the costs under control are very important, but I'm skeptical of what they're going to do with that sort of found money from moving the costs around. And I know I've seen the other side of things where with this sort of single payer system, wait times for things are longer. you might not get if you are, 90 years old with a disease, you might not get the same care as a patient that's, in their 30s with the same disease, because of the longevity and sort of like the algorithm of how they care for patients. And, I feel like it will increase access. I don't think that unless the hospitals themselves make different choices or allocate those newfound funds in a different way, it might not address the staffing crisis. It might not address the patient ratios. And, we might all still be just as overworked, just with a schedule that looks a little bit different, I feel like it could help, but it's not perfect.
Yeah. Like I said, lived in the UK for a long time, and the nurses I was mentioning earlier with the triplets, they are nurses in the UK, and they would be delighted to explain to you all of the ways that single payer does not make a nurse's life any easier.
Okay.
And the UK,
I had a suspicion.
And the UK is in a massive shortage and crisis for medical staff at all levels. So nurses, doctors, specialists, last I heard, and I may have outdated information, there was not a single medical specialty that they did not have either currently or anticipated in the next 5 years a distinct shortage of medical professionals in that area.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And I'm sure there's a thousand reasons for that. Some of them political, some of them the best fact. It's a small gray island in the middle of the North Sea, which is, suboptimal weather. I'm not going to lie. One needs to have a profound fondness for fish and chips and beer. So, not everybody's into that. So there's all kinds of reasons people might not be going to the UK. But it does worry me that we already have a nursing shortage. Not that I needed to tell you that, but I mean, we as a country, we already have a massive shortage of nurses. And then if we suddenly switch to a single payer system, which might drive down some of the wages available or and who knows, that is just, I can't imagine if we had fewer.
Right. It's not going to, the problem's not going to solve itself. It might only get worse.
Yeah. Because I think that, if we get fewer nurses, then we get to this tipping point where the job becomes just completely unsustainable. Nobody will do it.
Right.
Or the people that will are the ones that you wish wouldn't.
And healthcare providers and everything is a finite resource. You can't really replace a nurse with a robot yet. I know that there's companies that are trying, but
I really hope that they never manage it, because like I said, like we talked about at the beginning, I think that nurses bring so much of the much needed compassion and affection to the healthcare environment. They're the ones that are sat with you. They're the ones that, when you have just had a screaming child cut from your body and it's 2 a.m. and you're exhausted, it is the delightful maternity nurse who comes and says, "Why don't I take the screaming thing from you and you can sleep for 2 hours?" You really want her to not be a robot.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So, I hope that never happens, but I agree with you. I worry that, as we have people less willing to do it because we treat them badly and we're in this cycle, that they're going to look for a non-people alternative. Also, robots are very cheap. They have a terrible union. So
they have a terrible union.
So we are almost out of time. Tell me, is there anything else that you want to talk about before we go?
I want to just touch on, and this is just a personal thing, about during the pandemic, during what's going on, and calling the frontline healthcare workers heroes. Okay. And personally, I feel like when it's flattering, it's lovely, but it's also sometimes misplaced, because then it makes you feel like you're someone that's like dying for a cause, or, the analogy is that, oh, we're going into war, but we didn't sign up to give our life for our country. We signed up to take care of patients. So there's a lot of sensitivity around that issue, and being called either a hero or like comparing going to the front lines as like going to war. And I feel like sort of sidestepping the issue of we don't have access to supplies that we need or anything that we need to do our job properly. And we're not martyrs on purpose. So
I was just about to say, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I do think that there is a dangerously fine line between heroes and martyrs.
I agree.
And I am firmly in all the gratitude that you guys didn't just be like, dude, pandemic, I'm out, and all abandoned, that you stayed and have helped the country throughout all of this. And I think that that is amazing. I don't think that that means that we should say, well, I mean, if during COVID they could do it with none of these supplies, clearly that means that they were always optional. Nor do I think that that means that any of you have signed up for martyrdom. Right. And I think that that's a good reminder for people. I feel like my sister's a teacher, and we watched the same kind of thing happen with teachers, right? So last spring, they were heroes who on a dime turned all of their curriculum, and aren't they incredible? And anything the teachers need from me, I'm there. And then this year they're like, well, maybe if we could just not have to be in a classroom with 20 potential infectors, that would be great. And we went, I mean, they're really annoying when they're at home. So I feel like this is your job. And why are you complaining? If you didn't want to be around kids, why did you decide to be a teacher? My sister's literally been told that. Yeah. She's literally been heard that from parents. And the fact that, I know we have a shortage of vaccine, and that is stressful and terrifying for everybody. But the fact that all of our frontline staff, that every nurse, every hospital employee, and every teacher is not absolutely in the first wave of people getting it is, to me, like, we as policymakers have let you down. And the fact that there is not a huge outcry from the population saying that is all of us letting you guys down. So I want you to know that you are definitely heard on that, and have at least one ally.
I appreciate that.
For whatever that's worth to you.
It's worth a lot. It is worth a lot.
Okay. Well, thank you so very much for your time. I have learned in this, we have a new action point with our letter writing campaign.
Yes.
To change the licensing requirements for nurses to include a mental health component. I'm excited already to make the world a better place. Yeah. And we will continue to work on the rebranding of Burnout so that we can find a victim forward response to that. But I feel like that's pretty good homework assignment for us, really. Like, I think we did well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I'm proud of us. Good job.
Me too.
All right. Thank you so much, Dee.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Bye. You've been listening to Hey, I Want Your Job. For more information on how you can get your own awesome job, visit ONH Consulting at www.onhconsulting.com. We offer incredible resumes, no-nonsense career advice, and real-world tips for landing a job in today's market. Check us out on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Insta for more insider information. Soon, you'll be hearing us say, I'm Michelle Olivier, and hey, I want your job.